They didn't wake up one morning and decide to feel anxious. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't weakness. It was something slower, quieter, more invisible. It began like a shadow, showing up just before work, lingering after dinner, whispering. Doubts at the edges of good days. People called it stress, fatigue, even personality, but deep inside, they knew it was something else. Anxiety isn't loud. It doesn't knock. It seeps. It swells. It settles into your chest like fog, wraps itself around your thoughts and convinces you that this tightness, this unease is normal, that you are the problem. They smiled when they were supposed to, answered calls, typed emails, but inside every day felt like carrying a weight no one else could see, and it went on like that for years. Until one quiet evening, not dramatic, not desperate, they looked in the mirror and whispered the words they'd never dared say out loud. I can't live like this anymore. And in that whisper a seed was planted, not of panic, but of possibility, because recovery doesn't begin with a roar. It begins with noticing the silence. Mornings were the hardest, not because anything specific was wrong, but because everything felt like too much. The sun came in through the window like it always had, but it didn't feel warm. It felt loud. They would open their eyes and instantly feel the weight, a racing mind, a clenched jaw, shoulders already tight. The thought of getting out of bed wasn't overwhelming because the day was bad. It was overwhelming because the day existed. Every decision, no matter how small, came with questions they couldn't answer. Should I eat now? What if I can't? Finish it? Should I shower? What if I get dizzy again? Should I reply to that message? What if I say the wrong thing? Even in stillness, their heart beat too fast. Even in safety, their body behaved like danger was near. It made no sense, and that made it worse. They tried everything to hide it. They went to work, smiled in Zoom calls, responded to, "How are you?" with, "I'm fine." But beneath it, there was always that trembling thread, that low hum of fear, the sense that something, anything, could snap them out of control. They avoided crowded places, then quiet ones, then conversations. Eventually, they avoided themselves. Some nights they couldn't sleep at all. Other nights they only slept because they were too emotionally exhausted to stay awake. And the dreams were never restful. They started questioning their memory, their balance, their sanity, their worth. They Googled symptoms late at night. Heart racing, chest tightness, floating feelings, blurry vision. Anxiety came up every time, but still, something didn't feel real about that word. It felt too small for what they were carrying. People told them to relax, meditate, drink more water, but they weren't thirsty. They were drowning. Every day began and ended with the same question. Why do I feel like this? And the most painful part, there was no clear answer. Not yet. There was a time when everything felt lighter. They remembered waking up with curiosity, not dread. The kind of mornings where coffee tasted like joy and the air outside smelled like possibility. Back then, life wasn't perfect, but it had color, texture, flow. They had passions, music that stirred something inside, a habit of walking with no destination, people they could laugh with, real, chest-shaking laughter, moments where the world seemed to make sense, or at least didn't need to. There was a version of them that didn't second-guess every word in a message, didn't count the hours until they could go home and hide, didn't feel danger in silence. They weren't fearless, but they were free. They used to speak their mind without the tremble. They could walk into a room and not scan for exits. They made eye contact with strangers and didn't wonder if they were being judged. Sometimes it's hard to believe that person ever existed, because anxiety doesn't take everything at once. It chips, it whispers, it takes a memory here, a habit, there. It replaces freedom with rituals, connection with caution, but they remembered. They remembered biking at sunset. They remembered the feeling of breath that didn't catch in the chest. They remembered falling asleep to stories, not spirals, and, in those memories, lived a truth that mattered more than any diagnosis. They were not born broken. This wasn't who they were. It was something that had happened to them. Somewhere along the way, their nervous system got stuck in survival, and they forgot how to feel safe. But somewhere even deeper, that earlier version of themselves still existed, waiting, watching, wanting to return, and that quietly, patiently, would become the reason they didn't give up. It didn't start with a panic attack. It didn't start with something obvious like screaming or fainting. It started with the smallest things, things easy to explain away. They began cancelling plans more often. At first, it was just exhaustion. Then, discomfort. Eventually, fear. Not fear of people or places, fear of how they would feel in them. They noticed their heart beat a little too fast in the grocery store. Their breath caught slightly in the middle of a sentence. Their chest felt tight at random. Maybe I'm just tired, they thought, but deep down they were already taking mental notes. Already on guard, they stopped drinking coffee, then stopped staying up late, then stopped saying yes. One by one, things that used to bring joy started to feel risky. Crowds, loud rooms, small talk, deadlines, phones, even silence. And no one noticed. Not really. Because they became good at hiding it. That was part of the spiral too, the pressure to pretend. They smiled when they felt like screaming. They nodded through meetings where every sound felt amplified, every moment stretched too long. They started tracking symptoms, each flutter of the heart, each dizzy moment. At night they would lie in bed searching. Is this anxiety or something else? Is this normal? Do other people feel like this too? They always found the same answers. But they never found relief. The spiral deepened when the fear stopped being about external things and started being about themselves. What if I'm losing it? What if this never stops? What if I wake up one day and I can't function at all? They became afraid of their own body, of their own mind. And when friends asked how they were, they replied with the most convincing lie in the world. I'm just tired. But this wasn't tiredness. This was the nervous system on fire. This was a mind stuck in hyper-awareness. This was fear without an obvious source, just the feeling of something being wrong, always, everywhere. They stopped looking forward to weekends. They stopped reaching out first. They stopped trusting themselves. Every choice started with a calculation. How will this make me feel? Will I get dizzy again? What if I can't escape? Even simple things like going to the store, answering a call, eating in public, became mental negotiations. It was exhausting, and so they began to avoid, and avoidance, as it always does, made the world smaller. It didn't happen in one day. It was months, maybe years. The spiral was slow, like quicksand, and the more they tried to push through, the more they sank. Until one day they realized. They didn't remember the last time they felt safe, not calm, not happy, just safe. And that realization hurt more than any panic attack ever could, because it meant anxiety wasn't a bad moment anymore. It had become their life. Rock bottom didn't come with a breakdown, no screaming, no collapsing to the floor, no dramatic moment where everything shattered at once. It came in silence. They were standing in their own kitchen, dishes in the sink, phone on silent, blinds half closed. It was just another afternoon, like so many others. The same light filtering in, the same numbness in their chest, the same ache behind their eyes. But this time, something was different. They had nothing left to fight with. The exhaustion wasn't just physical anymore. It was inside their soul. A kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, a weariness that even time seemed scared to touch. They had been holding on to routines, to responsibilities, to relationships, anything to feel normal. But their grip was slipping, not from weakness but from depletion. Their energy was gone, their hope faint, their body heavy, and no one knew. No one could see that they hadn't truly laughed in months, that they hadn't eaten a full meal without nausea, that they checked their pulse every hour just to make sure they were still here. They weren't waiting for someone to rescue them. They didn't even believe rescue was possible anymore. They just stood there, hands trembling, breath shallow, mind racing, and let the moment stretch out. And then, like a whisper, it came. I don't know how to keep doing this. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't need to. It echoed inside their ribs. It sat at the base of their throat. It hummed beneath their heartbeat. This wasn't suicidal. It wasn't dramatic. It was just surrender. Not because they wanted to give up, because they didn't know how to go forward. And in that silence, in that breath between breakdown and breakthrough, something shifted, not a miracle, not a sudden fix, just space, a moment where, for the first time in a long time, they didn't try to push it away. They didn't distract. They didn't fight. They just stood in their truth. I am not okay. And somehow, that was the most honest thing they'd felt in years, because sometimes rock bottom isn't the moment everything falls apart. Sometimes it's the moment we stop pretending it hasn't already. It didn't feel like a turning point when it happened. There was no music swelling in the background, no sudden flash of light, just a knock at the door, soft, patient, almost unsure. He didn't ask, "How are you?" He didn't say, "You'll be okay." He didn't tell them what to do. He sat on the step outside their door, not waiting to be invited in, not needing to fix anything, and for the first time in weeks, they didn't feel watched. They felt witnessed. The note he had brought sat on the counter for hours before they opened it. It didn't say much, just one line. You don't have to carry it alone. And though it wasn't a solution, it landed. Not because of the words, but because of the way they were offered. No urgency, no judgment, no prescription, just kindness. The kind that doesn't try to cure you. The kind that stays, even when you have nothing to give back. And somehow that presence, unasked for, undeserved, unexplained, felt safer than anything else had in months. They didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. They weren't alone anymore. Kindness, when you're used to fear, can feel suspicious. The next day, they didn't answer the door. He knocked twice. Softly, just like before. But they sat still on the floor behind it, breath held, eyes locked on the wood grain. No movement, no response. He didn't knock a third time. That evening, they found another cup of tea, warm, untouched, left outside the door. No note this time, just the quiet echo of someone still trying, and somehow that made it worse. They didn't want to owe anyone anything, didn't want to appear weak, didn't want to be a burden. They wanted to fix it alone, quietly, without being seen. So they pulled away. Texts went unread, curtains stayed drawn. Even the warm cup of tea felt like too much, a gesture too gentle for the fortress they'd built around their heart. They avoided him. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because anxiety makes even love feel dangerous. It asks, what if he expects something in return? What if he sees the real me? What if I disappoint him too? And so they chose silence because silence felt safer than being vulnerable. He came by again, a few days later, didn't knock this time. Just sat on the steps for a while watching the sky, then left. And they watched him go, from behind the blinds, arms crossed, jaw clenched, heart conflicted. They didn't want to be helped, but somewhere inside, they didn't want to be abandoned either. Still, the fear won, for now. The walls stayed up. The door stayed closed, and in the quiet afterward, they sat with a truth they couldn't name. That part of them wanted connection, but the other part wasn't ready to receive it, yet. He didn't take the silence personally. He never asked why. They didn't open the door, never texted, "Are you okay?" Never pushed. Instead, he adjusted his rhythm to match theirs, not intruding, not retreating, just present. Every few days, he left something at their door, not advice, not pamphlets, not promises, just warmth, a small plant once with a note. Even the slowest growth counts. A book of short poems another day, a pencil and blank notebook the next week. Then nothing for a while, just quiet footsteps, a sign he'd passed. And through it all, he never knocked again. He didn't demand trust. He waited for it to arrive on its own. At first, it annoyed them, then confused them, then softened something. Because deep down, they were used to people showing up with expectations, to comfort with strings attached, to care that turned into control. But this was different. He wasn't trying to fix their silence. He was respecting it. He wasn't waiting for the version of them that smiled more or talked more. He was holding space for the one that simply existed, and somehow that kind of presence, the kind that doesn't pressure, doesn't pity, felt like the safest thing they'd ever known. They didn't say thank you, not yet. But they started, leaving the cup out on the porch in the morning, started opening the blinds a little wider, started lingering at the door when they heard his footsteps fade. It wasn't connection yet, but it was the beginning of permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to take up space. Permission to heal. The notebook sat untouched on the table for 3 days. Its cover was simple, soft brown, no logos, no quotes. The kind of notebook that looked like it belonged to someone with answers. They didn't feel like that person, but something about it called to them. Not loudly, not with urgency, just a quiet suggestion, like the whisper of a breeze beneath a heavy door. One night, unable to sleep and too tired to scroll anymore, they opened it. Blank pages. Clean, inviting, terrifying. They stared at the first page for nearly 10 minutes before writing a single word. "I don't know where to start," and for some reason that felt enough. The next night, they wrote again, not because they had something profound to say, but because it felt lighter, like placing thoughts somewhere outside their own head, even briefly, made the noise inside a little more manageable. They wrote without grammar, without spelling, without shame. They wrote about the tightness in their chest, the moment they almost cried on the bus, the memory of laughing without fear, the guilt they felt for not being okay. They wrote about the silence, and the tea, and him. Sometimes it was one paragraph, sometimes 3 pages, sometimes just a list of symptoms and feelings. But each word felt like an exhale. They didn't call it journaling. That felt too official. They just emptied, and slowly the pages began to hold what they couldn't. There was no instant relief, no magical moment where the anxiety vanished. But there was a shift. They noticed their breath was slightly deeper after writing, that they fell asleep a bit faster on writing nights, that the spiral of thoughts had somewhere else to go. It became a ritual, not a fix, not a cure. A ritual, something they did for themselves, something they chose, and that made all the difference. Because, for the first time in a long time, they weren't just reacting to anxiety, they were responding to themselves, with curiosity, with compassion, with ink. And in those quiet, scribbled lines, a thought emerged, not bold, not even confident, but real. Maybe healing doesn't start with control. Maybe it starts with expression. They didn't show anyone their writing, didn't need to. It wasn't for proof. It was for presence, and that, this tiny, private act of showing up for themselves, felt like the first real step towards something they hadn't felt in years. Not peace. Not joy, not clarity, agency. The ability to do something, however small, that didn't come from fear. It happened on a Tuesday morning. One of those grey, forgettable kinds where time feels heavy and the sky doesn't know what it wants. They got out of bed without arguing with themselves. No internal war. No bracing for impact. No bargaining to stay 5 more minutes. Just movement. They didn't notice it at first. They brushed their teeth, made tea, opened the window slightly to let in the cold air. It wasn't until they sat down with their notebook that they realized something had changed. Their hands weren't shaking, not dramatically, not completely, but enough that the pen moved smoothly, enough that they could read their own handwriting again. They wrote that morning, not about fear or spirals or symptoms. They wrote about light, about how it filtered through the window and landed on the floor like a soft invitation. They didn't cry, didn't smile either, but they paused, and in that pause, something unfamiliar crept in, not relief, not pride, something smaller. Curiosity. Could it happen again tomorrow? They weren't ready to call it healing. Not yet. But it was different, subtle, a little crack in the routine of dread. The tea tasted warmer, the silence wasn't as loud. Their breath didn't catch as much, and it wasn't that the anxiety was gone. It was still there, like background static. But for the first time in so long, it wasn't the only thing playing. There was something else now, a thread of calm running through the noise. It didn't last all day. By afternoon they felt the pull again, the tightness in the ribs, the fog behind the eyes. But something had shifted, because now they knew peace was possible, even if just for a moment, even if it came quietly. And once you felt it, even once, you start looking for it again, not to chase it, but to remember it's real. He hadn't spoken much before, not about himself. Most of their early moments were filled with silence or small talk, or the occasional comment about the weather. He was there, consistent and calm, but never imposing. But that morning he knocked again. Not with urgency, but with intention. They opened the door this time. He didn't say much at first, just sat with them on the porch steps, hands wrapped around his own cup of tea, eyes watching the soft clouds drift by. After a while he spoke. "I used to think I was broken," he said, voice even. "Woke up every day with a knot in my chest, so tight I thought I'd never breathe normally again." They turned slightly. He'd never said anything like this before. "I'd stand in the shower for 30 minutes, just trying to feel something that didn't hurt," he continued. "At work I'd smile, joke, even got promoted, but inside it felt like I was falling through a hole no one else could see." He didn't look at them when he said it. He wasn't trying to perform pain. He was simply remembering. "And the worst part wasn't the fear," he said. "It was the shame. The feeling that everyone else had a map and I didn't even know what country I was in." They nodded slowly. Something about his words felt like pages from their own journal, only written in someone else's hand. "I didn't talk about it for years," he said. "Told myself it would pass, that I just needed to work harder, sleep more, distract better." He exhaled, but it didn't pass. It grew, quietly, until I couldn't tell the difference between my thoughts and my symptoms. They looked down, at their own hands, remembering. "I started writing," he said, glancing at them now. "Not to be a writer, just to survive. It gave the storm somewhere to go." They smiled, barely. He saw the notebook once, tucked under their arm, never mentioned it. Until now, he nodded slightly. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. "But I want you to know, I didn't sit on these steps because I thought you were weak. I sat here because I remember what it felt like to wish someone would sit with me." Silence followed. The kind that didn't feel empty. It felt like safety. He didn't offer solutions, didn't map out a recovery plan. He just placed his story beside theirs, gently, like a lantern in the dark. And in that shared space, they realized something. Profound. They weren't alone in their pain, and they didn't have to be alone in their healing. The first real change wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a breakthrough or a breakdown. It came quietly, like most important things. They started walking, not far, just around the block. The first time, they almost turned back halfway. Their chest tightened when a neighbor waved, and they nearly panicked when a car passed too closely. But they kept going, not because they felt brave, but because they were tired of feeling afraid. The second time, they made it to the corner store and back. The third, they stopped to look at a tree, its leaves shivering softly in the wind. Each step wasn't just about movement. It was about reclaiming space. Their body, their breath, their place in the world. They started noticing things. The way sunlight danced through kitchen windows, how the air felt softer after it rained, the rhythm of their footsteps, how it matched the beat of something steadier inside them. They weren't healed, not even close. But healing had begun to move. They kept journaling. Some nights were harder than others. Some entries turned into rants, pages of frustration and fear. Others read like poems, fragments of hope stitched together with ink. They added a new ritual, grounding. They'd sit with their feet on the floor and describe 5 things they could see, 4 they could touch, 3 they could hear, 2 they could smell, and 1 they could taste. At first it felt silly, but over time it brought them back, not just to the room, to themselves. Some days, anxiety still came in waves, unexpected, uninvited, but it no longer dragged them under. They could watch it, name it, and breathe through it. And when it felt too much, they'd return to something simple: breath. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6, repeat. It wasn't magic, but it was real. Their world, once a tight, dark tunnel, began to widen. They accepted a call from a friend. They laughed, really laughed, at a show one night. They cooked a full meal and ate it without checking their pulse once. The helper stayed close, but not too close. Sometimes they walked together. Other times, he just waved from his porch. He never praised, never pushed, just noticed. "Your eyes look steadier today," he said once. And they did. The progress wasn't linear. Some days were heavy, some mornings still came with dread. But now, there was something different. When anxiety whispered they had answers. "You're not real. I'm not broken. This feeling will pass." And when it didn't pass quickly, they knew how to sit with it, how to write, how to breathe, how to stay. Recovery wasn't a finish line. It was a direction. And they were walking toward it, one steady, self-led step at a time. They realized something important along the way. No one was going to heal them. Not the man on the porch. Not the videos they watched at midnight. Not even time itself. Healing was their own to carry, their own to explore, and that was empowering. They started making lists, not of tasks, but of tools. Things that helped, things that grounded, things that reminded them they had control over small, important moments. Morning light, breathing in the shower, a favorite cup for tea, a journal page that began with, "I don't have to fix everything today." They weren't chasing perfection. They were building consistency. Every morning, they practiced a simple breath sequence. Every evening, they listed one thing that felt manageable, even if it was just brushing their teeth. And when the waves came, as they always did, they stopped asking, "Why me?" and started whispering, "It's okay to feel this." They read about the nervous system, learned how anxiety isn't just in the mind, it lives in the body. They began to treat their body gently, like a home in renovation, stretching instead of forcing, resting without guilt, eating without fear. They even gave their anxiety a name, something soft and small, not to mock it, but to remember it wasn't bigger than them. And in those quieter, self-guided moments, they started becoming their own safest place. They built little rituals, not rigid, but steady. Candles lit during journaling, soft music during cleaning, one encouraging sticky note on the mirror every week. They forgave themselves for setbacks. When panic returned, they didn't call it failure. They called it data. Information, a reminder to slow down, check in and respond with care. They stopped comparing their recovery to others, stopped wondering if it was fast enough, good enough, enough, because it was theirs, their path, their pace, and slowly it became more than recovery. It became self-trust. They began to see anxiety not as the enemy, but as a signal, a language their body used to say, "Please listen." So they listened, and then they responded with breath, with stillness, with presence, no medication, no grand solutions, just real repeated effort, their own hands, their own heart, and in that steady rhythm of showing up for themselves day after day, something shifted. They stopped surviving and started living. They didn't wake up one day and feel cured. That's not how it works, but one morning they did wake up and feel calm, not excited, not euphoric, just calm. It was the kind of quiet that felt earned, the kind that settles behind your ribs after you've walked through fire and lived to see the sun again. They noticed it in the little things first. Their breath flowed without them having to think about it. They didn't check their pulse before. Going to bed, they went to the grocery store and didn't even realize they hadn't thought about panicking until they were already back home. Bags on the counter, smile on their lips. It wasn't that anxiety disappeared. It still showed up sometimes, during busy days, loud moments, long silences. But now they had tools. More importantly, they had trust. Trust in their body, trust in their process, trust that even if anxiety came, it didn't have to stay. They walked with more presence, spoke with more ease. Even the quiet didn't scare them anymore because they had found peace, not in perfection, not in control, but in acceptance. They no longer needed to outrun anxiety. They had learned to walk beside it without letting it steer the path. Some days were still hard. Healing isn't a straight line. But now they didn't fear the hard days. They greeted them like familiar visitors, offering comfort instead of resistance. They kept journaling, kept breathing, kept noticing the small miracles of ordinary life, a warm cup of tea, a laugh that came from the chest, a full night of rest, and through it all they began to feel something they hadn't in a long time, wholeness. Not because they were never anxious, but because they knew who they were beyond the anxiety. They were not broken, not damaged, not weak. They were human, tender, resilient, and for the first time in years, they felt like themselves again. They used to think healing meant becoming someone else, someone stronger, calmer, braver, someone who never felt fear again. But now, they know that was never the goal. Healing wasn't about becoming different. It was about returning to the version of themselves that existed before the fear took over. The one who noticed small joys, who trusted their own breath, who believed in mornings. They didn't conquer anxiety, they learned to listen to it. And in doing so, they discovered something deeper beneath the panic, the racing thoughts, the tightness in the chest. They found presence and compassion and courage, not loud, fearless courage, but the quiet kind, the kind that shows up on tired days, the kind that stays gentle when everything else feels harsh, the kind that says, even now, especially now, you are still worthy of peace. This journey wasn't about escaping fear. It was about learning that they could walk through it again and again and still keep their heart intact. They didn't just survive anxiety. They met the version of themselves that had been waiting patiently beneath it all along. There's no single path, no perfect timeline, but if they could leave behind a few gentle reflections for anyone walking a similar road, it would be these. Healing whispers, not shouts. The big breakthroughs are rare. What matters most are the soft, repeated acts of care, a breath, a pause, a journal page. Your body is not your enemy, even when it shakes, even when it panics. It's trying to protect you. When you listen with compassion, everything changes. You don't have to understand everything to begin. The spiral doesn't need to be solved all at once. You can start from exactly where you are, with one tool, one thought, one cup of tea. Progress is not linear, and that's okay. Setbacks aren't failures, they're reminders. Even a step backward still belongs to the journey forward. You are not alone, even if no one sees it, even if no one understands. Somewhere someone else is holding a pen, breathing through fear, trying again, just like you. This story was theirs, but these lessons, they're yours now too. And if you take only one thing with you, let it be this: you are not broken, you are becoming. They didn't find peace in a pill. They found it in patience, in the soft rhythm of breath returning, in the sound of a pen sliding across a page, in the quiet, knowing that healing was slow but possible. There were no shortcuts, no magic formulas, only moments strung together. Like fragile lights, each one a tiny decision to try again. And through it all, they stayed, even when it hurt, even when it made no sense, even when no one else could see their strength. They stayed, and now, on the other side of the noise, they carry something softer. Not pride, not perfection, but peace, the kind you earn by walking through darkness and choosing again and again to turn toward the light. If this story felt familiar, if something in it echoed your own quiet battles, know that you're not alone. And if it brought even a small moment of peace, a pause, a breath, a shift, then maybe it's worth sharing. Give it a like if it gave you something. Share it with someone who needs a gentle voice in their storm. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, tender, honest, subscribe. There's another one waiting, a different journey, a different heartbeat. But maybe it holds something you need too. Until then, stay soft with yourself, stay steady, and remember, you are already on your way.